I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. Science fiction author Arthur C. Clarke once said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." He also said that the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. See, I think we all want to believe in magic. When we watch a movie or we listen to someone tell a story, we actively allow ourselves to believe in that level of magic. And to do that, we suspend our disbelief. We even use the term movie magic to describe special effects and editing, because deep down, we want there to be some magic left in this world. Long before there were movies or even photography, there were magicians. These were special people who used technology and maybe something a little less easy to define to go and show us the impossible. So even in a world of smartphones and DNA testing, the magician is still with us. And today, my guest is Victoria Mavis, an internationally recognized magician, author, and podcaster based in Munich, Germany. Victoria is a member of the Elite Magic Circle Association, and she is one of the few internationally recognized professional wizards. Victoria, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm honored to be a guest of your show.
So, Victoria, we all use the word magic a lot. It can be used to sell deodorant as well as to talk about the mystical that's in the woods and all of that. How do you define magic?
Yes, that is a very good question, Scott, and you are right. So nowadays, magic is really used everywhere, and it seems to work really well in advertising as well as in TV series and big film productions and anywhere to influence people and to create a certain atmosphere. But for me, magic is basically everything we can't explain with our mind.
Ah, very good. Are there different types or levels of magic?
Yes, sure. So when it comes to entertaining magic, what I do as a magician on stage or close-up, it's really that there are different fields. So you have card magic, you have this close-up magic, you have big illusions, you have comedy magic, you have kids magic, you have mentalism, you also have bizarre magic. So what would connect with horror and horror movies and everything around that, and sometimes things that are really strange, like having seances and different other things. So there are different approaches to magic, but basically I think magic is something that can really uplift people because it's taking them out of their all-day life and bringing them in the world where everything is possible.
And I think that's very interesting because, of course, I talk about horror in that way, where horror allows us to get outside of the norm. And it allows us to work on certain things that perhaps we normally wouldn't work on, some of the darker aspects of ourselves. And I've noticed that whenever you look at something that has to do with magicians, a lot of times it's looking a little bit foreboding or looking as if you're going into something that is the unknown. And people feel a level of mysteriousness around that. Now, that is a mindset that can be very attractive to people. And from what I hear, you were relatively young when you got fascinated with magic. How old were you?
Yeah, actually just 4 years old when I had my first contact with magic and learned how to make my thumb disappear. And I got my first magic set with 7. And this is where I had my first magic show as well. And Scott, you mentioned it really good. So that magic is about the unknown. And it's also interesting that people are afraid of things they can't understand. or can't explain. And this is where sometimes people feel really challenged by magicians when it's about trickery. It seems that the magician is kind of smarter, and some people even get angry about it. And it's also about the unexpected, what I think is really great, because we have all our expectations, and it's really interesting when something unexpected happens. And the good thing is, when you are in a magic show, every moment something unexpected can happen, because you never know how this illusion will turn out.
Well, it's very interesting because, of course, you're talking about how there's a certain feeling of trepidation that some members of the audience can have. What is it for you? Say you're 7 years old, you get your first magic tricks that you're showing people. What did you feel? What did it do for you?
Yeah, a lot of excitement there, because I had this show and there were a lot of adults in the audience as well. And it was just so much passion for it. And I've spent so many hours in my room alone working on it, training it on it, all this entertainment, and then for the first time presenting it. So I had this magic hat and this magic coat, everything you would imagine. So a little girl on stage, they're presenting magic. And it was also a special feeling, because even at that age, I was able to, I mean, it's a bad word, but to fool, I would more say fascinate adults, because they came afterwards to me and wanted to know how I did it. And that was just an amazing feeling.
It always cracks me up when people say things like, I don't like this because they're trying to fool me. Yet just about every form of entertainment is in some way fooling you, because you have to let go of reality. If you're listening to a story, if you're listening to music, all of this stuff is happening to alter your perceptions. But some people really take it hard when it's something like magic. And is it because it's so in front of them, in their faces, or it asks them to be challenged?
Yeah, I think so. And it depends on how you present it. And this is why I always try to avoid the word trick, because it's then this trickery and it's like, yeah, this challenge, and one is smarter than the other. So I'm really about to give people a good time. But a lot of my colleagues really do this and trying to be better. So this can be really tough when you have an alpha male sitting there. So you're right. I would say everything is an illusion, and especially when it comes to films. And I
Right.
think that horror movies are the best example, because you go to a cinema, you sit there and you don't move anywhere. You're sitting there in your chair for about 90 minutes in a dark room with other people, but you start to feel all the fears and anxiety the figures on the screen are experiencing. And maybe it's only two-dimensional, not 3D, not a 3D movie, and you feel everything. This is the perfect illusion, and you know that exactly, but you have all these reactions in your body.
I think that's one of the wonderful things about not only magic, but cinema, that we go in willfully knowing full well that what we're going to see is not real. We buy the ticket, we sit down, we have the popcorn, and yet once the movie starts, we are engaged with something that we know was probably shot a year ago by people who are wearing makeup, and we forget all of that if the movie is good. And I think it's the same with an illusion. We forget that the stage is there if someone is doing a really masterful illusion. And I'm always intrigued by close-up magic. In other words, things that, if I can define it correctly, is where you're really doing the magic close-up. It's usually with some relatively simple, innocuous article like cards or a coin, and you're basically using your hands and the person's perceptions to do the magic. Would that be correct?
Yes, you're right. So this would be about the definition of close-up magic. It really happens in front of you and sometimes even in your hands. And it also can be not only cards and money and smartphones, but also pieces of mentalism, meaning telepathy or predicting the future. And this is really strong because you can imagine, Scott, when people see a magician on stage and there is a distance of about 10 feet or more, they think, yeah, okay, so this is all far away and there are mirrors and whatever. And I would know how this works when I would be closer. But when it happens directly in front of your face, it's really strong because you have no idea how it's done. And for me, this is really the art of astonishment.
Do you feel that you can create a level of intimacy with anybody when you're doing that?
Yeah, pretty sure. This is why I love performing close-up magic so much because it's so strong and it creates this strong memories for someone. And I always try to leave a small souvenir after that captures this magic moment that happened there. And you can imagine, Scott, because I'm thinking, for example, we're asking people to think of the first love of your life and to seconds later, the first name of this person appears on my forearm, and this is really strong.
Wow, that's really interesting. Tell me a little bit about what a typical moment is like in one of your close-up shows, because it sounds like that's really stuff that you're very excited by.
Yes, it is. It's also the stage magic. I always say it's like two worlds, and you can't really compare them because
Mm.
both worlds require different skill sets. So when you're working close up and so close with people, you need to be very aware of the attention, and every move you do has to be perfect, and you have to watch all angles around you because when there's someone standing in a bad angle, you have to keep track on that, to be really focused and have everything under your control when you're performing at a table with, let's say, 5 or 6 people there. And on stage, it's completely different because you have to create this atmosphere in the whole room and providing this magic world for everyone sitting in the audience. And you have to keep track of the whole stage and bringing people up, helping you. So you only have split seconds to decide if this person is working on stage or not. And there, everything is bigger. And of course, you get stronger emotions because when you have 500 people sitting there all laughing at the same time, this is like enhancing the frequency and energy in the room. But as you said, close-up would be very intimate. So creating this special moment for 1 or 2 persons only, maybe a couple.
Right. I think that's one of the most fascinating things about magic. You mentioned the stage. And when we're looking at films or we're looking at plays that take place on stages or on a screen, everything is figured out to the nth degree, but there isn't that connection or volunteering of an audience member coming in. So there's this weird level of where improv, where you allow people to come up and interact with the show. A lot of times that's free flowing and it's going to go wherever that character who comes into improv is going to take it. But you're not allowing that to happen necessarily. You're like in this very interesting middle world where you have the order and the control of film or theater, but you also take the risk of allowing something that would normally happen in improv to enter the show. How do you manage that?
Very interesting thought you're bringing up there, and you're very right. So this is really special where magic is in between those things, because it is, you don't know the person who's coming up and what he or she will do, and if this person is following directions correctly. If not, you could really end up having a problem on stage. And, magic is
Right.
live entertainment. It's not film. So you can't say, okay, we do another take. It's really live and you have to deal with it. And you have all the pressure, all the attention. And of course, the magician has to be in control. And this is why I say, in a good way, the magician is the most powerful person and the smartest person in the room, but only from this perspective, because the magician is the only one who knows what will happen next. No one else knows. So you have to be like 3 steps ahead. Like when you are playing chess, it's the same. So this is why magic has really this intellectual component to it. And you have to be in control, but you also have to be open to react to whatever is happening and whatever the spectator brings up. And sometimes you have audiences that are very lively and they love magic. So they shout out things and they bring things in, and then they really love it when you can take on that and bring it into the show. And this is why I love presenting magic so much, because every show is different. Even when I do the same illusions, it's different because there's another audience, there are other people on stage, and it's a unique piece of entertainment.
So yeah, you're a member. You mentioned before that there's a lot of competition at times from different magicians, and you mentioned alpha males and things like that. You're a member of the Magic Circle. It's the largest magic association in Europe. I think that's out of London, correct?
I mean, I'm in the Magic Circle in Germany, and every country has their own Magic Circle. So, and they are connected. So the Magic Circle in London is really special because they have a special house there with like a coffee for magicians, and there's a museum in the basement where you can find the original handcuffs of Houdini. So there is really a special atmosphere there, and as a magician, you have access there. And also in Germany, this is where all the members gather together and discuss the magic secrets.
Yeah, I was thinking about that mansion, I believe, or a castle that I had heard about, which was in London. Now, I know the motto is not apt to disclose secrets, but can you tell us how you got involved and what it takes to get in?
Sure, Scott. So this is really not so simple, at least here in Germany. I know it's a little bit different in the United States because there are several magic associations, and for some, you just pay to get in. Here over in Germany, it's really tough because you have to come for about 2 years to all the meetings and show that you are making progress and that you are really developing your own magic material. So not just going out to the magic shop and buy a card trick, present it, and that's it. Because magic is really about the personality, you know? So when you imagine a deck of playing cards, it's just a deck of playing cards. It's the personality of the magician who brings the cards to life. And a good magician can entertain you with a single card of playing cards for 2 hours, no problem. And it will be very fascinating. And this is why it's so important to develop this character, like in a movie, behind the magic. So this person on stage, this stage persona. And so you have to do an examination before you are allowed to become a member, and then you are an official member. And yeah, we have this kind of a license, all that, so that we are recognized as a magician worldwide. And sometimes it really helps when you are flying because you can imagine that the TSA is really looking closely at magic suitcases.
So on your website, you call yourself both a magician and a wizard. So what are the differences?
Yeah, so the magician is really the entertainer. So creating magic shows like David Copperfield, Chris Angel, just entertainment. And I think wizard is a little step further. It's also playing with the imagination and touching on other fields around magic and connecting other things with magic and really diving deep. For example, with the magic words abracadabra, and just a few people know what that means. And it means actually I create as I speak. So I'm looking in all fields to really create these special moments for people and to go one step further than the entertainment they know. And that there's something they can take away from being guests in my show.
So we've talked about stage magic, and I'm assuming that that's closer to the world of the entertainment of magic. But I know you also have a podcast, because I was on it, called Pure Mind Magic. And you mentioned mental magic. What is mental magic? Is that like hypnotism?
Yes, kind of. And before I answer your question, I have to say for everyone who's listening, Scott was an amazing guest at Pure Mind Magic. And I did a Halloween special with him. And you can find this episode, it's number 43, called Screaming for Pleasure. So it's really nice. And now to answer your question, mentalism is this special field of magic that concerns everything that has to do with our mind. And it is also this aspect of magic that comes closest to real magic, or where people sometimes are left behind with the feeling, was this just a trick, or was there maybe more involved? And I just love to leave it like that without saying any more. So, of course, in the printed version, you will find this kind of a disclaimer that it is entertainment and it's psychology, but it just creates this very strong feeling. And you can imagine when you watch a box on stage and someone gets in and a curtain is pulled up and down and the person disappeared, everyone knows, okay, that was a trick, obviously. So, but when it comes to like predicting the headlines 3 months in advance or something similar, people really start to think, is it a trick, or was it more? Is there a medium or a connection to the matrix or whatever? And this is the special part about a mentalism. And for me, performing a lot of mentalism on stage, what can involve hypnotism as well, I came up to research a little more, and I call it mind magic. So this is really about the mindset, and also teaching people in my work how they become a mind magician themselves without revealing magic secrets, but how does a magician think to make the impossible possible? And this is what interests me most, because when you look around, Scott, there are really brilliant minds in the world. And it seems that some people just use their brain in a different way than others. And it's said that we are using about 20%. I think there are different numbers out there at the moment of our potential. And what would happen if we would use more? And there's this very interesting movie that plays with this idea. And I think it's called Lucy, where she takes some drugs and there is an accident in her body. So all the drugs flood into her blood. And then she goes up to using 100% of her potential. And it's really interesting to see what is happening and what we could do if we could access everything that is in our mind. And obviously with hypnosis, you can get access to everything that is stored in your subconscious mind from the moment you entered into this world and all the things you have forgotten so far, but the information is still there. And this is where I think it gets really magical. And this is also things that you would do and you would use when you would really have magical powers.
You mentioned psychology, and one of the things that I think is interesting is if you're going to be a filmmaker, and most specifically, say, horror, in my case, you're always looking at entertainment and psychology as well. You need to kind of understand your audience and what will make them frightened. What do you think is in the psychology that you're looking at? What makes for an audience that is most receptive?
Also a good question, Scott. So it's really comparable with a film because you have a picture in mind and a vision, and you also have certain emotions people should feel. So it's about creating and also doing a reverse engineering and having this vision in mind, like you would have to create a movie and then see what needs to be done or yeah, what you need to create this atmosphere to drag the audience really in and capture their attention.
So, of course, when you're dealing with psychology, and we've talked about that, there's a level of intimacy that comes with people who are watching magic or experiencing magic. What are the biggest perceptions and misconceptions that there are in the culture about magic?
Well, I think the problem is what I once read, that when you look at any form of art, magic is always 20 years behind. And I think there is some truth to it. So, especially over here in Germany, it's like magic sometimes is really old fashioned, and people have these pictures in mind with the rabbit out of the hat and sawing a lady in half and all that. But for me, it's very important to tell people every time that I focus on modern magic, because magic has evolved, obviously. And when you look at things like Harry Potter, it shows that magic really can create this world of fantasy where dreams come true. And it's also, there is this important lesson, I think, that as a magician, you really have to know what you want. And for me, I think for most people, it's the biggest problem that they don't know what they want. And when you have this magic wand in your hand, you have to have an exact command on what should happen. You know what I mean? So this is a really strong metaphor for magic there, I think. And you can learn a lot from that. And it's really that magic is evolving all the time, and magic is different in every country and depending on the background of the magician. And there is the same illusion that can be presented in so many different ways.
Have you ever had people freak out at any of your shows?
Yeah, well, it happens, of course. And as I told you when you were on my show, sometimes it's really that magic can be scary. And for occasions like Halloween, I love to do that. I think it would be not my type to do it every time. And sometimes it just happens automatically because people freak out when I start to read their thoughts, because then they become really afraid that I do it all the time. So I had this already when I was a teenager, so that the neighbors were so afraid that I would sneak in the night and read their thoughts. And I just loved it because it was a great feeling. And I thought, wow, I have to be so convincing with only 14 years. So this is really strong. And this is where I also think that, yeah, there is also a connection between like magic and horror, because people kind of love to be freaked out and to feel these intense emotions. And it's really tough to feel them when you experience only the same routines every day. And this is why people love to go to horror movies. They love to ride roller coasters and also love to go to magic shows where they never know what happens. And as I said, it's live entertainment, and really sometimes accidents happen on stage, and then, yeah, you have to see what to do.
Have you ever been involved in something that was dealing with magic that freaked you out?
Well, yeah, that happens too, of course. And the only advantage is that when it happens, it's only me who knows it. No one else knows, because people don't know what I was doing or was aiming to do. And sometimes things happen with pyrotechnics. It's really easy. That happened a couple of times to me, so that something exploded in my hands, and that was really tough because I had to do the show with all this pain in the hands. So yeah, that was tough. And also, of course, when you miss something in the preparation, then you have a big problem on stage.
I think about like the electricity. If you talk to electricians, they will say that we know how to work with electricity, but we still don't really completely understand it. That every so often, even though you follow all the rules, it does something really weird. I was a firefighter at one point, and I can say the same thing for fire. Just when you think it's going to do a certain thing, it somehow weirdly defies logic or gravity and goes somewhere else as if it has its own mind. Have you ever had a moment moment like that with magic?
Also, a very interesting question. And I think, yes, sometimes this really happens because of the spectator and because I can't control everything that is going on there. And some of them have really strong reactions to it because when you tap on something that is pretty emotional to them, they are sometimes shocked and they are really in loss of words, and this is astonishing.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned emotion because I talked about pure mind magic being on your show before, and I was talking about my book, Screaming for Pleasure, how horror makes you happy and healthy. And one of the things that you mentioned, because we were talking about emotion and what was meant by happy and healthy and what horror can do to help people out, you mentioned, if I may bring up, that your mother had died and that you went to a horror film to release some of those emotions. Do you think that there's a similar release with magic that there is in movies, like horror movies, where we can get over something unexpected by watching magic?
Yeah, I'm sure there is. And I have colleagues in the United States that really use magic for therapy and they go into hospitals and really make people happy there. And they also sometimes see some really kind of healing effects there, even in the body. And I'm pretty sure that magic can do that because it's like I mentioned in the beginning, it creates this world for some moments or minutes where everything is possible and people kind of lose their connection to their daily routine in a good way because they get so absorbed into this world and into everything that is going on. Because when the magic show tells an interesting story, it is can be even stronger than a film because you see the real person on stage acting and interacting there. So it's really strong, and I'm sure it can do the same. Different than a horror movie, of course, because most of the time, as I said, magic is more uplifting. I think it's more motivational. So it comes from a different approach, but with the same result.
So, when you mentioned earlier that one of the things that's said about magic is that it's about 20 years behind the times, one of the things that I like to talk about with horror is that if you watch a specific horror film from a specific time period, it kind of, by nature of what a horror film is supposed to do, it comments on the anxieties of that time. It needs to know what scares people at that point or whatever makes them nervous for it to be effective. How does magic comment or reflect on society?
Well, I think on society, maybe not really. So I didn't see a magician do that. I think this is more something of people, comedians that do things with politics, but magic maybe more from the technical side because a lot of magic illusions deal with smartphones nowadays
Mm-hmm.
or with iPads. And I always say that the magic of today is the science of tomorrow. And it's really like years ago, it was always the magician where people turn to, like in a fireplace or something, like really years and years back then, and people turned to a magician to ask for advice because the magicians were the people who had some special knowledge, some special books or whatever. And nowadays, I mean, everyone has access to the internet, so it's different to be a magician nowadays, but still, also, when you look at your smartphone, you use it every day, but I'm sure most people can't explain exactly how it is working. So it is a kind of magic behind this smartphone. And because magic is very technical when it comes to big illusions and illusions that are happening on TV shows, there is this connection, and magic is kind of transforming there into this, or at least taking advantage of all modern technologies we have and creating new magic illusions with our all-day technical devices.
That's great, because that's kind of what I was thinking of with this. I was thinking of that Arthur C. Clarke quote where advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. What I think I always feel when I'm watching magicians, it's not always the rabbit out of the hat. Instead, you see people doing these things that take in the technology of the day and overcome that technology by the form of the act that is being portrayed around it. So it kind of feels like no matter what our technology is, magic is kind of like this metaphor of how there's always the unknown that is still going to be able to put that technology in its place. There's always something more to learn. And so that's kind of how I was looking at magic. I love the idea of where you take a smartphone and people assume that it's going to do certain things, that it's almost infallible, and you can make it disappear. You can make it do certain things. I think that that's really one of the unique things about magic is it's almost a humbling device to what we're doing when we think about the modern world. But horror movies have always used magic or magicians in them since the silent era. I keep thinking of Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And of course, we see right there the anxiety that people have about magicians and people who can do hypnosis and mind reading, that it becomes part of a horror movie. But one of my favorites is Don't Look Now, which is all about grief and guilt and premonitions. Do you experience premonitions? And if so, what do you think they are? Is it something that everybody can have?
Yeah, Scott, I'm pretty sure that everyone can have. The biggest problem is only what I always tell people, that first, most people are not present in the moment. They are very distracted, what makes my job as a magician really easy, because magic is all about distractions. That you don't notice what's going on stage, really. So, or you're looking where I want you to look. So this is magic, the magic concept broken down to its basics. And yeah, it's also then that I think for premonition, you need a good intuition, and we all have this intuition. And it's not that it's just for women. It's also men have a good intuition, and it's like a muscle. You can train it. But the biggest problem that evolves around intuition is that our channel is so blocked because so much is going on, and we are not open to receive these messages and to feel those things. And this is why I would say it's really a good advice to disconnect from time to time and to go offline really on purpose. And you will see that you perceive the world in a different way, and you will notice different things because you are not so distracted, and you will have better feelings and a better intuition and can go with your guts when it comes to decisions.
So we've talked about how the body is very important to magic, where you put your hands, how you present yourself, how you can misdirect by moving people's point of view to a different area where you're working. How important is voice?
Yeah, good question. Voice, I think, might be even more important than the body, because voice has a frequency, and voice is the one who delivers all the emotions, and the voice is also unique to every person in the world. So with the voice, you are creating something. And Scott, you and me as podcasters know that pretty well. So it's important because we have only the voice to create something, to create this atmosphere, to get people's attention, and all. Also in a magic show, sometimes it's really dark and you can't see anything, and you only have this voice. And the good thing is that you pay more attention to it, because we know that the most energy leaves us through the eyes. So when our eyes are open, and this is why when you meditate or do other things, you would really like to concentrate, you close your eyes. And with that, you sharpen your other senses, for example, your ears. So you can listen better. And it's said that blind people hear really better than people who can see. So I would say the voice is really strong. And when you think of singers that are really great, they can give you goosebumps just with their voice, nothing else.
Right. Are there any singers that you would say are like magicians?
That's an interesting question. I think everyone that produces a music and has a really strong talent is a magician themselves, just in another way, because they can create all these strong emotions with their voice and with putting words in a special order to create something and combining that. So this is just another form of magic. And I couldn't imagine a magic show without music because it's really the strong element. And I'm sure, Scott, you would say the same about horror movies because
Mm-hmm.
the music in horror movies plays a very important role. And this is also where the psychology comes in again. And also the misdirection, especially in horror movies, because then people think, oh, it's happening. No, it's not happening. Oh, it's happening. No, it's not happening. And when you don't think of it anymore, then it's happening.
And let's just say podcasting is magic as well. So,
Yes, it is.
now you have a book out about podcasting called How Podcasting Can Change Your Life. Strong words, which I happen to agree. Can you talk a little bit about it?
Sure. So this book was really kind of my calling. And I would say, as you said, podcasting is magical and it is about opening a magic door into a magic world. Because when you start a podcast, incredible things can happen. And since I started my podcast, I feel like my life went to the fast lane. So many things are happening and so many people reaching out from around the world wanting to be a guest on my show or asking me to give interviews at their shows. So it's just amazing. And when you think of it, Scott, we two met at Podcast Movement in Philadelphia this year. So yeah, and you start to build connections because it is via the voice. And so you have this emotion behind it. And when you think about the difference between reading a book, it's just ink on paper. And when you compare to listen to an audiobook that is narrated by the author, him or herself, it is so much stronger because you get the feeling of the author. So there's a lot more to it. And so I decided I have to write this book in a motivational way to inspire more people out there to discover the magic of podcasting by starting their own show and becoming a showmaster in the topic what interests them the most.
And I feel the same way about podcasting. I think it is a very unique magic that we get to do. And it does allow me to speak to people all across the world. And a lot of times it is about that voice. You made a very interesting point about audiobooks because I just read a book and then got the audiobook from a director who was doing his memoirs. And the amount of emotion that comes out when he's talking about some people who died in the time that has passed since he made his first film, you could hear that personal grief, and it made him so much more human, and it made the book so much more amazing. So I think that you're onto something really interesting with that book there. And before we got on here, you gave me a list of horror movies that you like. And I've noticed a little bit of a trend that they seem to have touches of magic or premonitions or a little bit of the supernatural to them. Let's talk a little bit about what makes these movies very interesting to you, Victoria Mavis. Some of them I've talked about before, but let's start with Get Out.
Yes. So, you mentioned hypnosis before, and I'm sure that hypnosis can be used as kind of a psychological weapon there. And it is really strong when you know what you are doing there. So I don't use it in that way in my magic shows, but I learned a lot about hypnosis. And I won't spoiler too much about the movie for those of your audience who haven't seen it yet, but this movie is really freaking you out. It's starting so slowly and then getting you deeper and deeper into a very strange world where you know exactly nothing is as it seems. But first, you can't grab it because there are so many pieces of the puzzle that don't fit together. And then it's really interesting how one layer after the other gets revealed. And I was really sweating watching this movie.
Yeah, I really like the idea of how hypnotism, as you're mentioning, was used not only as how we normally think of hypnotism, but it's also how through suggestion over centuries or decades, people think a certain way. And that this movie was showing that being kind of paralyzing to folks. And I thought that that was a really interesting thing that they did with that film, where it was a social hypnotism as well as an actual hypnotism that is being done inside of the movie. And one of the movies that surprised me that was on your list was Devil, which is, this is the movie where a group of people are trapped in an elevator and the devil is mysteriously amongst them, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
Ooh, tell me what it is about this movie that really freaked you out.
Yeah, there's an interesting story to that because, my second academic degree I got in film design. So that was my Master of Arts, and I had to do this master thesis. And I picked the topic of elevators in movies because I found it so interesting to play with this concept where you have this small room and people can be trapped and don't have the power to decide what's going on or what's coming next. So I was playing around with that, and I thought it's also interesting for magic to have this concept, this idea. And so I went out to research a lot of movies that have to do with elevators, and then did some research on how they use the element of an elevator in the movie. And there are also romantic movies you can find where the elevator plays a role, and there's this psychology behind it, if the elevator goes up or down or gets stuck or whatever. And then, of course, I came across the film Devil, and I thought, wow, it was so interesting, the trailer even of the movie, so that you see everything from the top and everything is going so vertical. So it creates already this mood. And then I thought, this is like the nightmare of everyone, to be like trapped with strangers in a room, and one of them is the devil, and you are confronted with all the sins you have done. So really a strong movie, and I think it's not too much mainstream, but I really liked it.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty fun film. It's myself, and I think it's interesting that one of the things that you see in magicians' acts all the time is the box, the case that you put people in and they disappear, and that's kind of like an elevator in and of itself, where you have this thing where people are just trapped inside of a box and then they're not there, and we're confused as to where they may have gone. I love when you're talking about movies and elevators that they can also be used for absurd comedy. And one of my favorite moments is from an old movie called Being There with Peter Sellers, where he plays this guy who is mentally challenged. He's a simpleton, works as a gardener, and the rich guy that he works for dies. And the other elite rich just assume that this guy who is simple and doesn't understand much more than cartoons they think he's a plain-spoken guy, and he becomes like an advisor to presidents and things because he says things in weird metaphor and he's really just repeating cartoons. But at one point, he's in an elevator with everybody. First time he's ever in an elevator, and he's surrounded by heads of state and stuff, and everybody's just doing the normal looking in all different directions, somewhat bored. And he's looking around and he goes, "Why are we still in here?" Because he doesn't realize that it's an elevator, and everybody sees some like deep metaphoric thing that he's talking about with it. And I just love the idea that there is an absurdist fashion to the idea that our technology puts us in a little box and moves us from one place to the other. And that's, in a weird way, this strange form of magic that we do with technology as well. Another movie that you talked about was Final Destination, the teenager that has the vision of him and his friends dying in a plane crash. He prevents the accident only to have death hunt him down one by one. So my assumption is this has a little bit to do with premonitions, but what is it about this movie that excites you?
Yes, Scott, you got it right again. I was so fascinated about that, like predicting the future or having a sense what is happening. So, as we talked about before with intuition and premonition, and when you know how good are your chances of picking another path, because I'm pretty sure that our future is never set in stone and it all depends on our decisions, and we make decisions every moment in our life. And so I found that very interesting when I started to watch the first movie of this circle from the pure no, not my podcast, I mean from the so getting confused by myself here, from the Final Destination. And even the title is kind of really cool because the Final Destination, there is so much about it and to it. So yeah, it's just interesting and how they try to find a way out of it, and death catches them anyway. So yeah, I just like it. It's good.
Do you think that in that movie, Death's kind of like a magician with his audience? He's doing an act?
Never thought of this, but yeah, that would make sense.
I was thinking about it because there's that whole thing about the seating chart, and that he has this whole thing planned. Okay, here's where people die, and it's off. And for the rest of the time, he's like changing the act. And all these deaths are so amazing. They're like Rube Goldberg devices. And so they always hit me as kind of like a performance that death is doing, as opposed to just coming and grabbing somebody.
Yes, very, very nice idea about it. And it's really there that the smallest piece leads to something really big. So they do one thing wrong and it's like a ripple effect then.
Yeah, I thought I really love that first movie. And another film that you talked about was one of my favorites, The Descent. Talk about this movie. Give us a little bit of an idea of what the story is and what excites you about it.
Yeah. I'm really honored that I picked one of your favorite movies, because I know you are the absolute expert when it comes to horror movies. But still to this day, I think The Descent is one of the most scary movies I have ever seen. So this is really crazy. And it's, again, while I was studying film, there was another project. I can't quite remember what it was, but we had the task to do some research on horror. And I picked this movie because I read that it is really scary, and it definitely is. And I just thought to myself, who would go after this horror story in their own life had happened to this cave and go down there in the dark with the friends? Who would do that? So, and then it's so crazy what's happening there, and it's dark and it just freaks you out. And it's an older movie, but it's so strong, and it's really playing games with our mind.
I love that movie for many of the reasons that you're talking about. And it's one of those spots where I see film, especially horror films, as a magic act, because that was a super low budget film. And if you were to listen to, say, the audio commentary about it, you realize that so much of that, the reason that it works is because of the limitations that they had, that they really needed to make you feel claustrophobic. So they built these caves very small because they needed to make them small, and the passages became smaller and smaller. And they actually made some of the cave walls where for one shot, it would be flipped on the left, and on another shot, it would be flipped on the right, but it was the same cave and it was the same wall. It was just moved in a different way. And the actors and the lighting was diverting your attention away from it being so obvious to being something that felt very real. And I will say that The Descent is one of the few times, I'm not a claustrophobic person, but I watched that and I started feeling my toes stretching inside of my shoes because I was really feeling, especially when one of the characters gets caught. They're trapped and they're having a hard time breathing, and someone has to tell them a joke to get them to relax enough to be able to pull them from one end to the other. I thought that was amazing. And then having something actually chasing you through the dark. I can't say enough about that film. So I'm glad that you brought that one up, and I'm glad that it's one of your favorites. How would you take these horror movies that we just talked about and say you were going to do a Halloween special and you wanted to do a horror movie homage? How would you work these kind of ideas into a magic act?
That is a very good question. And since, Scott, you brought up so many interesting ideas around it now, so I already took some notes on that because you inspired me here. So I can't wait for next Halloween to come. And yeah, it's really kind of similar because, as you said, so they are trying to make people feel claustrophobic. And while you were talking, I thought of this other film. I think it's called Open Water. What was this very small budget production? I think they did it for $200,000, and this film brought in millions of dollars. And you just have this boat and the sea and the actors and nothing else. And I know from the production that they did it weekend after weekend for, I think, a year or something to get the film together because the director was still working in a full-time job. So a magic act in itself, I would say. But then it's really, what elements can you use to create this kind of a scary atmosphere that is pure illusion, but it brings up all those feelings that people can't move.
That's wonderful. And I'm pleased that you mentioned that one as well, because I see that as another movie about claustrophobia, but a different version of it, where it's too much space. Mm-hmm. No matter where you look, the space looks exactly the same. The horizon is the same. The waves are the same. And there's nowhere to go. And you must feel. All you can think of is what's underneath by your feet.
Yeah.
What can't you see is everything that's underneath you. So I think that's I thought that was a wonderfully primal horror film as well. And I guess I want to ask the final question, which is, you've talked about magic and how much it does for people, and how, of course, it's an ancient form. What do you think is the role that magic plays in modern society right now?
Yeah, this is also a good question, Scott. And I think it's really to motivate people and to give them some relief of the stressful day, because everything today is at such a high pace and everything has to go faster and faster, and everyone is working around the clock, and people can reach you wherever you are via your smartphone, so you're always connected. And I think nowadays it's really the magic to give you this time of relaxation, to spend time with your family, to just sit there, be amazed and be astonished. Because when you are so stressed, it's really tough to get the feeling of astonishment. But when you sit down in this dark room and you connect with the magician on stage, I'm pretty sure that can bring a lot back and can also take the stress out of you.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure we've only scratched the surface of the world of magic, and hopefully we've gotten you, the listener, curious to look a little deeper into the unknown, because innovation and discovery and advances in technology all live in the same place that magic lives, that spot where we venture a little past what is possible. And we reach out to touch that impossible. It's no longer the impossible. It's no longer the unknown. And when we make something that was at one time impossible a reality, that is some real magic. Victoria, thank you so much. Can you tell us where the listeners can find out more about you and upcoming tour dates?
Of course, Scott. Thanks for asking. So the magic website is victoria-mavis.com. If you want to find out more about my book, How Podcasting Can Change Your Life, and everything I create around it, it's goldmine-podcasting.com. And the best way to connect with me is via LinkedIn. When you search for Victoria Mavis, you find me there.
I want to thank Victoria Mavis one more time for coming on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Scott, for having me. And I'm looking forward to stay in touch and see you at the next podcast movement.
And I want to thank everyone who is listening for taking the time to do so. And feel free to email me with your own thoughts about today's episode. And until the next time, stay hellbent. If you've enjoyed my rants and raves on this podcast, you might be interested in my new book. It's called Screaming for Pleasure: How Horror Makes You Happy and Healthy, and it is available now through your favorite book dealers. Screaming for Pleasure is a love letter to all things that go bump in the night and how horror not only reinvents itself to reflect each generation's anxieties, but it can also be healing as well as thrilling. It's a deeper dive into the obsessive ideas that I've espoused on the podcast, with a focus on welcoming people who can't remember the last horror film they watched. See, I want to encourage people who might have a preconceived notion about the genre to take a look from a different perspective. I hope to invite a new appreciation for this most underappreciated art form by showing its diversity and, yes, even the unexpected health benefits of letting horror into your life. Now, so far, the reviews for my book have been very good, and the word of mouth is growing. If you've gotten the book or expect to get it, I thank you so very much. And if you do buy my book, take a picture of yourself with it, screaming your head off, or pose with a picture in a weird location. For instance, if you live near the Amityville house, risk getting possessed for a brief flicker of fame. If you do take a picture, send a digital copy to me via my email address, scott@hellbentforhorror.com, and I will blast it on my social media. And I'm also going to add your photo to a special thank you collage I'm making to salute the early adopters to my version of The New Flesh. And I've already had a few pictures from people who have gotten the book who show themselves screaming, and I want to thank them. I want to thank Matt Harding, Brian Martinez, Krista Rose, Dan Truman, Eric Anderson, Aaron Day, Ian Carruthers, John Arminio, Keys Williams, John Kitley, Kevin Marr, Dr. Mark O. Martin, Matthew Solomon, Rhonda Bauman, Dr. Rhonda Bauman that is, and Vanessa Yonta Wright. Thanks so much, folks. I do have a favor to ask. If you buy the book and you enjoy it, and if you're inclined to do so, I would greatly appreciate if you could write a review of the book online. If you order from Amazon, you can write a review on Amazon. Another great place to leave a review is goodreads.com. Reviews like yours from verified purchasers of the book are so important to help get the book visible on bookseller websites. Now, if you do write a review, let me know. I'll send you something absolutely useless, like a sticker that shows your superiority in taste of books. Hey, stickers work as motivation on Fitbit type things, and I'm open to experimentation. I'd be very grateful for your help in this, and I hope I can return the favor by keeping you entertained as we hurtle into 2019. I also want to take a moment to personally thank some folks who've been supporting my work through Patreon. James Hancock, Andrew Boylan, Bradley J. Cornish, Damian Allen, Dan Schreffler, Dennis Gilmet, Donald Englund, E.J. Harden, Jack Warrington, Isaac Thorne, James Kelly, Jan Jones, Jeff Reynolds, Janelle Coley, Joe Maguire, John Arminio, John Beasley, John Colucci, Josiah Pitchforth, Keith Say, Casey Van, Laura Burkhalter, Chris Thompson, Tony Dixon, Vanessa Hoare, and others who wish to remain anonymous patrons of my madness. Thank you. It has been my pleasure to get to keep my conversation with you going throughout 2018, and I look forward to a new year, and I hope you are too. Stay hellbent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/hellbentforhorror, and my Twitter handle is hellbenthorror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.